Greetings, extraterrestrials, and welcome to History for Aliens Roman Mythology. We begin in Magna Graecia. Around 800 to 700 BCE, Greeks were migrating to Italy for its materials, particularly wheat in Sicily. Sicily is often called the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, and so controlling Sicily would be a great asset for any civilization. With their settlements in Italy and Sicily came their culture and their religion. You'll often hear people say that Roman mythology is Greek mythology, and for the most part that's true. Roman mythology is the exact same as Greek mythology, except for name changes really. Zeus is changed to Jupiter, Poseidon to Neptune, Hades to Pluto, Aphrodite to Venus, and so on and so on. I'll be trying to use the Roman names, but if I make a mistake and use a Greek name, it's because I don't really care about mythology and I'm human and humans make mistakes. In the beginning, there was chaos. This is chaos. He's a person, or she, or it. I don't know, maybe it's transgender. I don't know. Chaos had 5 children with himself. Tartarus, the underworld, Terra, the earth, Cupid, love, and romance. Scotus, the Supreme Court of the United States, aka Darkness, and Nox, the Night. Terra went on to give birth to Uranus, and then together they banged and created Oceanus, Saturn, and Ops. Scotus and Nox also banged and created Ether and Dies, that's day and brightness. And I just want to point out that it's interesting that Cupid had to be around from the beginning. Cupid is firing arrows left and right. People are getting knocked up with themselves, with others, with their brothers, sisters. All of this is made possible, and the creation is made possible because of Cupid being around in the beginning. Our first real story begins when Uranus went to rap with the Earth, his mother and lover. So Saturn, his son, stood up for his mother and cut off Uranus's genitals as seen in this painting. The genitals were thrown into the ocean, and out of them came Venus, or Aphrodite. This painting is called The Birth of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. Venus, by today's standards, would probably only be like a 6 or a 7, but during her time she was a knockout 10. Saturn and Ops start banging, and they create Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, Juno, Ceres, and Vesta. Jupiter is probably the most predominant god. He is also Zeus in Greek mythology, the god of lightning. Saturn, fearing that one of his kids would overthrow him, the same as he overthrew his father Uranus, decides to eat his children. Ops, their mother, decides to hide Jupiter and instead tricks Saturn into thinking he ate Jupiter by feeding him a rock. When Jupiter grows old, he tricks his dad into vomiting up all his siblings, and then, together with his siblings, he wages war on the older gods, called the Titans, in what's called the Titanomachy, the Battle of the Titans. Jupiter and the Olympians win and set up their throne on Mount Olympus. Jupiter then bangs everything he can see and gives birth to Mars, Vulcan, Minerva, Apollo, Mercury, Diana, and Hercules. Hercules is probably the most famous of his children, but interestingly enough, he is not an Olympian. Jupiter, Neptune, Juno, Ceres, Vesta, Venus, Mars, Vulcan, Minerva, Apollo, Mercury, and Diana are the Olympians. Jupiter comes up with this crazy cool idea that he wants to create an idiot species that will worship him and the other gods without question. So Jupiter gives Prometheus, who is a Titan, the task of creating man, which he does out of mud, as seen here in this little picture to the right. Jupiter is happy with the creation and believes that now he has a perfect idiot stupid species, and all is well. But Prometheus, having pride in his creation, wants better for humans, and so he steals fire from Mount Olympus and gives it to man. Jupiter gets really pissed off with Prometheus, seeing that humans are now evolving and creating and eating and cooking and starting to live not as piously as they used to. They are becoming self-sufficient and no longer need to worship gods as much as they used to. And it's clear why Jupiter was upset. So Jupiter decides to punish Prometheus for going around his back and giving humans fire by chaining him to a rock and then having a bird eat out his liver every day, and every night his liver would grow back. Shows you how advanced the gods and the titans were. They already had stem cell research mastered, even in early antiquity. Jupiter's not done with his punishment yet, and he creates Pandora, the first woman to complement the man. He gives her a box, and it's a surprise box, so she opens it, and out starts flying all of the pains and horrors of the world: depression, sadness, fear, aging, death. And she manages to close it, leaving one final thing inside, and that's hope. Humans still have hope. Humans live for hope. It's what we breathe on. It's the reason we wake up in the morning, because we still have hope. Even though we still have plague and war and all this other awful crap in our lives, we still have hope. This brings us to Hercules, who I want to talk about really quick. Hercules was a hero and demigod born from a mortal mother and Jupiter. When he was a child and he was nursing off Juno, he bit her tit. And when he was pushed off, he sprayed milk all over into the sky, creating the Milky Way. As a child, Hercules also choked a snake to death as a symbol of his strength, even as a young baby boy. Hercules is perhaps most famous for his 12 labors. These are a series of video game-like tasks with increasing difficulty that really made him the status of a hero in Greek and Roman mythology. I only want to talk about one of his tasks, though, because it's one that shows a lot of his cunning and his strength and the reason why he was a great hero, and that is the Nemean lion. Hercules was assigned to kill this lion, wandering in the hills of Nemea, living in a cave. Its fur was said to be impenetrable to weapons, and Hercules decides he was up for the task. So when he goes and he finds this lion, he starts choking it to death. And he's breaking its jaw, and he's not using any weapons, he's using just his bare hands. And he manages to kill it eventually, and he uses one of its own claws to remove the hide from the body of the lion, and then he starts wearing the hide around everywhere he goes. So anytime you see a statue of a guy wearing a lion's hide, it may be because that statue is Hercules, or it could also be because whoever that person is trying to emulate Hercules and his strength and his cunning, and showing that, look at me, I'm a great warrior like Hercules was. So Hercules went on, and he finished his 12 labors, and he went on the hunt for the golden fleece with Jason, and I'm not going to talk about any of that right now because it's more Greek than it is Roman. I mean, it is still a Roman story, and it comes up, but I don't think it's essential to the history of the Romans, so I'm going to skip it. But it's a cool story if you want to do your own research. For now, though, we got to talk about how Hercules died. Hercules, like all of us, gets caught up with lady problems, particularly a love triangle. And he's killed when one of his disgruntled lovers sends him a shirt covered with poison from one of his own poisoned arrows. When he puts the shirt on, it burns his skin, and it's just so unbearable, and he starts building a funeral pyre, and he burns himself to death. And as his soul is wandering up into the heavens, Jupiter and the Olympians grab his soul, they pull him in, and they grant him the honor of becoming a god because of his great and heroic acts here on Earth. This brings us to the Trojan War. Around the year 1200 BCE, a war breaks out between the Greeks and the Trojans, when this lovely lady, the most beautiful woman of them all, Helena, decides to elope or is kidnapped by this man, Paris. Paris was a Trojan prince, and a Trojan prince stealing a great, beautiful queen of Sparta would obviously stir up some controversy, same as it would today. The Greeks were led by King Agamemnon and Achilles. Achilles you might have heard of because he was born from the water gods. He was born from a sea nymph and a water god, and when he was a child, his mother dipped him in the river Styx in an attempt to make him invincible to any earthly damage, and this really helped make him one of the greatest warriors in all of Greek history. During the war, one of Paris's generals, Hector, kills Achilles' friend. Achilles, being upset at his friend's death, challenges Hector to one-on-one combat, and Hector agrees. Achilles quickly kills Hector, and as Hector is dying, he predicts that Achilles will die outside the gates of Troy, which of course Achilles finds as humorous and unbelievable because he's killing Hector. Hector's body is then dragged along the backside of Achilles' chariot in an attempt to rub it into the Trojans, and it's all great and fun and everyone loves it. After the death of Hector, Paris shoots an arrow in Achilles' heel, which you remember is where his mom held him underwater, and so that was the one part of his body that wasn't invincible. Achilles then dies because of this injury, and although it's kind of a stupid injury, he dies being one of the greatest warriors in all of Greek and Roman history. This brings us to the Odyssey. The Odyssey is a story of a 10-year journey from a man named Odysseus from his home in Ithaca over to Troy, where he fights in the Trojan War. Then he goes all around the Mediterranean trying to get back home until he eventually does. As I just said, Odysseus served in the Trojan War, and when King Agamemnon was doing a surprise retreat, they left behind a giant horse made out of wood, and Odysseus and a few other people were inside the horse. And when the horse was brought inside the city at night, Odysseus and his elite fighting force jumped out and began to kill everyone in the city. They were able to sack Troy overnight, and basically that was the end of the war. It's said that Helena returned to Sparta, and King Agamemnon returned to his wife, cheating on him, like most soldiers. And despite everyone now suffering from further marital problems, the Greeks are successful and win the war, which is what it's really all about. Odysseus' return journey is a lot more difficult, though. He encounters a Cyclops and has to poke its only eye out. He escapes the Cyclops Island. He then goes on a trip to the underworld. He's visited by sirens and sea nymphs, and the whole journey is just crazy. One story I do want to quickly mention, though, is Odysseus' journey to the underworld. It's said that he went to the Pillars of Hercules near Gibraltar in Spain, and as he was making a sacrifice, all of a sudden these spirits started popping up around him. One of the spirits that came up around him was Achilles. And Odysseus, when he sees Achilles, is like, "Oh my god, Achilles, you're my greatest hero. I'm your biggest fan. You're such a cool warrior." And Achilles tells him, "I would rather be the slave, to the farmer that owns no land, than be king of the underworld." And this gives an interesting insight into what the underworld was like for the Greeks. For most Greeks, the underworld was an awful, boring, and monotonous place, and it was just horrible. There was a place called Elysium that was saved for the greatest and the most powerful and studious warriors, but if Achilles didn't make it to Elysium, it's very likely any of you or me or any of us common people would ever make it to Elysium. And to me, it's just interesting how awful the afterlife is portrayed as just this boring, monotonous place. Enough of that, though. Odysseus makes his way home, and when he comes home, he finds all these suitors trying to seduce his wife, and he does the only thing that any man can reasonably do in that situation. He pulls out his bow and arrow, and he starts killing everybody. And he's successful, and his wife and his son realize that it's him, and they fall back in love, and everyone lives happily ever after. If you've ever read the book in high school, it's pretty boring. I read it in high school, and I thought it was awful. If you do, however, choose to read it, I want you to realize that it wasn't meant to be told in one sitting. It was originally the story was more or less campfire stories. They were short, they had a lesson, and at the end of every episode, Odysseus is back on his ship on his way home until he runs into another problem. So if you were living in ancient Greece, your grandfather would likely tell the story of Odysseus differently than your father would, or your uncle, or the neighbor. Everyone told it differently, everyone put their own twists and turns in the story, Just the fact that it's recorded is really why it's so great, and because it does some innovative storytelling things such as flashbacks and stuff, but that's besides the point. Back to the mythology. Aeneas was a Trojan prince and the son of Venus, and during the sack of Troy, Aeneas managed to escape. One of Aeneas' ancestors, Sylvia, ended up banging the god Mars, and Sylvia gave birth to twins, Romulus and Remus, who we will cover in further detail in next episode. But for now, that's all. Just a quick summary of the Roman gods, and perhaps their biggest legacy is that we've decided to name the planets after them. First, Sol, Mercury, Venus, Luna, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and of course Terra, the Earth. Thank you for watching History for Aliens. Hope to see you next time.